It was my job to watch and log all 2,400 hours of the Poughkeepsie Tapes. In the first month alone, I couldn't sleep for more than an hour or two at night. I still have nightmares about them.
The Poughkeepsie Tapes is a 2007 mockumentary-style found footage film, and it's one that has gotten itself quite the reputation over the years for being a particularly disturbing watch. Framed as a true crime documentary going over the gruesome crimes of a serial killer following some 800 tapes being discovered in the abandoned house the killer left behind, the film focuses mainly on the abduction and years of horror that Cheryl Dempsey experienced at the hands of this deranged madman.
Tell me, you were happy I killed your family.
No! The release of this film is a very strange story. It was completed back in 2007 and had a theatrical run planned with its trailer playing before many movies that same year, but it was strangely pulled from the release schedule with little explanation. The only notable theory about why this happened was due to a disastrous festival screening, but it wasn't because the film itself was poorly received. It was that the festival mishandled this particular screening in a way that really damaged the film's first impressions. So the first screening it was shown at was a success, but the second decided that they would take the liberty of marketing it as an actual, real documentary about something that actually happened, which was something they didn't check with the creators or the studio on, and something that would never have been approved by either party. It didn't go over well with audiences at all because of the extreme nature of the film, and a real documentary showing the things that this movie does and talking about the killer in the way they do would be just about the most distasteful way to go about making a documentary. On top of that, this festival also marketed a Q&A with the creators, which was something that wasn't even possible because John Eric Dowdle and Drew Dowdle, the people who made the movie, had signed contracts with MGM stating that they would not do any press work for the film in an attempt to capture some of that Blair Witch-esque mystique. The blowout from this mishandled screening gave the film a ton of bad press, and while MGM denied that this was the reason for it getting pulled, the fact that it was already a pretty difficult movie to market and the lack of any actual explanation makes it pretty tough to point to anything else, although we can't say for sure. It was then released to VOD in 2014 briefly before getting pulled again for some strange reason, and in 2017, Shout Factory gave this underground found footage flick a bigger platform with a proper Blu-ray release. I love found footage horror so much. A huge chunk of what I watched when I was first really getting into the genre was found footage, and as I've said before, the most terrified I have ever been while watching a movie in my adult life was with Lake Mungo, another mockumentary-style film. So when I started getting requests for one that I had neglected to watch but had heard of over the years, I was really looking forward to finally checking out the Poughkeepsie Tapes.
Here is a man who's figured out he's good at something.
So the opening bit of the film spends most of its time really talking up the killer behind all of this, who's known as Edward Carver. We see police interviews where they're talking about how genius he is, how calculated the whole thing was, and it's also putting a lot of work in to create a morbid anticipation for what's on those tapes that were found in his house. This is a movie that I have been told over the years is extremely disturbing and really well made. I just didn't have that experience with it at all. And my issues with it started pretty much as soon as we got past the point of them gassing up Mr. Carver. This is certainly not something I had expected to say after hearing the things I did about this one. I found the Poughkeepsie Tapes to be a really goofy movie for a number of reasons, the first of which being the way that these people talk about the killer. All of the stuff early on was fine when we don't have the context of the videos of this dude, and some of the discussion around it regarding framing someone later on is actually really good. But most of this felt so cartoonish to me. This is a mockumentary, and to me, the absolute most important thing about making a mockumentary is that you have to maintain some sense of believability. Otherwise, it begs the question of why you chose that format for the story. With something like Lake Mungo, every time I watch that movie, I can easily forget that what I'm watching isn't an actual documentary about a haunting because it's presented in such a grounded and realistic way, and the acting is superb. That is not the case here.
It's part of the reason that we never grouped his killings together. It's probably why he did it.
The acting throughout the movie can be pretty bad, and when it's not terrible, it's still plagued by the feeling of every line being scripted and delivered unnaturally, instead of feeling like I'm watching real people being interviewed about things. I think this is the sort of thing that really benefits from not scripting lines too much, just giving people like a notion of what they're meant to say and then let them say it in their natural voice. And I'm sure to a degree there was some of that, but a lot of it feels too stiff. We'll get more into this, but part of the issue is that it feels like they wanted everyone to sort of be in awe of the cunning of Ed Carver, but instead of finding things early on for him to do that would earn that, they just have people talk about pretty unremarkable things the dude did in a way that makes them sound like they were these genius, deeply calculated and rehearsed moves. The silliest part of this for me was the murder of this couple that Ed Carver hitched a ride with. He bashed the guy over the head with a hammer and then drugged the woman with chloroform or something like that. And for whatever reason, this Nobel Prize winner talked about this maneuver like it was some crazy complex bit of acrobatics that would have to be extensively rehearsed.
He takes a rag with some sort of chemical agent with his right hand and he places it over her mouth. And with his left hand holding the camera, he's reaching it out and holding it in front of her face like this. I mean, this isn't the kind of thing that just happens. He must have practiced this motion thoroughly to get it right.
What the fuck are you talking about? They then go on to cover the fact that Carver had an awareness of the area before committing the murder, as if that's also something that's like wildly impressive and indicative of a criminal genius.
He knows where the next gas station is. He knows that it's only a mile or two off the freeway. And he knows that it's a desolate area between the freeway and the gas station. In fact, the station is abandoned. And I bet he knows that too.
I needed to get that out of the way quickly because that section of the movie, I don't know if it bothered me because I found it really funny, but yeah, you know, I wasn't expecting to be giggling while watching this thing based off of how I've heard it described. And yet there I was, giggling. It just felt really silly to see people who are professionals in their field talking about really obvious or unremarkable things in a way that felt like the movie was trying to build up the genius and unpredictability of the killer without actually coming up with things that would make him that. So they just had the characters overemphasize and hoped the viewer would just go along with it. Like latch on to the tone of what they're saying, but don't think about it too much. It really wasn't necessary either because there is some cool stuff later on with the way he manipulated public perception of his murders. So I think if they just waited and let that moment come, it would have worked better. What he wound up doing was that he intentionally altered the MO of his crimes to seem like he was targeting only prostitutes for a while, which then made it so that people who weren't prostitutes would have their guards down, and it, you know, that makes the general population more vulnerable. That was really cool, but the best part of this whole thing is the way he managed to successfully frame the murders on a cop. During this MO switch, he would commit these murders while posing as a police officer. It turns out that an actual officer, James Foley, had a history of picking up prostitutes in the area, so Carver would then go to that same place, kill them, and then because there were witnesses placing Foley in the area at the time, his DNA was found on the bodies of these women because Carver managed to steal his sperm from a fertility clinic. And the fact that Carver was posing as a cop when the murders were committed ultimately led to Foley being pinned with the crimes, and he was put to death under a false accusation. Now, he was cleared of the charges when Carver tipped off Foley's partner a few days after the execution with the location of a new body, which meant that the killer was still out there and Foley was innocent. He was exonerated on September 12th, 2001, which meant that because of 9/11, news of him being innocent wasn't the thing that anyone was focused on, and the story was pushed much further back in the papers. So to a lot of the public, Foley was still guilty. There's a great quote from a guy who introduces this part of the narrative that pretty much sums up what's so cool about this.
Serial killer kills cop using justice system.
That's a great plot point, and they didn't need to try and make every little thing the guy did into some genius criminal move when he had stuff like this up his sleeve for later on. So, with that out of the way, is the Poughkeepsie Tapes actually as disturbing as it's made out to be? Of course, this is something that can only be answered on an individual basis, but for me, There were only 2 moments of the film that I thought actually worked from a horror standpoint, and I wasn't even all that freaked out by them. It was just kind of like, oh, that's creepy. The first is early on, where he abducted a young girl from her front lawn, and the scene of him approaching her while she's out on her own is really uncomfortable and had a lot of tension.
I'm not supposed to talk to strangers.
Well, you're not supposed to have bad manners either.
It's a very unsettling moment, and it's also the first crime that we're aware the guy committed, so at this point we have no idea what to expect from him. The sort of like lighthearted way he's speaking is so unsettling. This guy's when he's speaking normally, more on that in a moment. When he's speaking normally with this like light, airy voice, he is creepy as all hell.
Hi.
To me, the scariest scene of the movie was this one where he picks up this woman while posing as a cop and offers to drop her off at a nearby gas station. So she accepts the ride and climbs in, and there's this great slow buildup of her realizing something is wrong when he goes past the exit he should have taken, and her performance is fantastic.
I'm not a cop.
You're not.
No.
That's not very funny.
Well, I'm not trying to be.
You get such a believable sense of dread and increasing panic, but what I really loved was the way she portrayed the mental denial of actually being in a situation where she is truly trapped and facing something horrifying. That's something that this movie tends to do very well. The reactions from the people who encounter and are attacked by Carver are often really effective and chilling, and watching as they slowly lose themselves while in his captivity and become more and more willing to do exactly what he says is disturbing. The movie is at its most effective when it forces you to sit through these prolonged sequences of grounded psychological torment, because it's only in those moments where it manages to live up to the illusion of being an actual documentary. The problem is that they don't do this nearly enough. It's fairly clear from the way those opening few minutes are handled that they wanted this to be a very disturbing movie about a messed up serial killer. They want to get you immersed, they want you to believe it, and they want it to be a really messed up experience. But I couldn't ever shake the feeling that they were just trying way too hard to force the movie to be disturbing and force Carver to seem as unhinged as possible, and in the process of doing so, they accidentally turn the whole thing into a fucking comedy.
What is your name?
I get what they were going for with the way they approached the creep factor of this killer. There are moments like the infamous scene where he crawls into the room with a mask on the back of his head and it looks really uncanny and creepy. I can see what the idea was here, but because of the presentation, it didn't translate to anything remotely creepy to me. It just felt silly, and it feels really fucking weird to be looking at someone chained up in a dingy basement with tape over their mouths, panicking as the end of their life draws near and screaming in horror, and because of the decisions made in terms of Carver's character, I'm sitting on the couch and on the verge of tears because I can't take any of it seriously and I'm just cackling like a fucking maniac. One of the issues that you have to face if you're trying to sell something as believable is that it's quite difficult to get performances from people that don't feel like they're giving performances. And that's especially the case when you're working on something with a relatively low budget. This killer's got some creepy moments. Once again, the best part to me being that scene with the woman getting abducted, where his monotone delivery of some really bone-chilling lines actually got under my skin, but I swear to God, every time he came into a room wearing a Harry Potter robe and a Plague Doctor Halloween mask, yelling like a kid trying way too hard for an audition at the school play, there was no part of me that was able to take it seriously. It's already a tough game to play trying to make your mockumentary feel believable, but that becomes even more of a challenge when you have any element of the story that even inches towards absurdity, because then you have the tall task of making sure it doesn't go so far that it breaks the illusion, but far enough that you still have the impact you want it to. To be clear, I have found many an absurd, bordering on comedic horror characters to be effectively creepy in their disturbed minds. For a recent, totally not contentious example, Longlegs is a character who definitely leans toward the absurd and humorous, but I find him to be a successful example of this sort of thing.
And you'll be there, and you'll be there,
Not everyone does, of course. I'm just using it as a recent example of something that works for me. Ed Carver is at his best when he's out in the real world, speaking in his cold, excited voice before doing something horrible. The scene where he returns to the house where he kidnapped Cheryl and killed her boyfriend, and Cheryl's mother slowly realizes who he is fantastic. But when we get these scenes, it really feels like they were just going too far with it, and it totally broke the creep factor for me. That, on top of some of the goofy interviews, made it really hard for me to get sucked into what I was made to believe was going to be a very disturbing experience. That opening section, the behavior of this guy during the scenes in the basement, those things make it so that, moments that otherwise would have hit a lot harder just felt really dull because there's this sense of trying too hard throughout the whole thing. There's this sequence where two young Girl Scouts come to Carver's home offering to sell cookies, and he tells them he's a cop to coax them into coming inside. Now, this is an inherently uncomfortable situation, and a hell of a tense one since, we know who this is. And we saw earlier on that he absolutely does not draw the line when it comes to kids. But, I don't know, something about this just felt like another case where they were trying too hard to make it uncomfortable and it wound up feeling like inauthentic and doesn't feel realistic. And this is the sort of thing that would usually have me squirming in discomfort. But here it was just kind of like, oh, that's not good. That's not what I should be feeling there. A lot of these things just play really dull because of the feel of the movie, where in other contexts they would have freaked me the hell out. Another major issue that I have is that Cheryl is not fleshed out even slightly as a character, which makes the exploitation of her feel way more empty than it already does. It's lacking depth here, which is just another example of how much more focused this movie was on trying to be edgy than it was on delivering a compelling story for this mockumentary. To balance things out, another moment that I found actually very effective was toward the end of the movie when Cheryl Dempsey is left behind with the tapes at Carver's house, and they have an interview with her where she's just paralyzed. She doesn't know how to respond to any of the interviewer's questions because Carver broke her to the point where all she knows is being told what to say and do. So when she's asked to speak for herself, she just starts asking what she's meant to say. That was really effective. And to me, it's another example of this film being at its best when it focuses on these slower psychological moments instead of Carver yelling at people in a basement in a really corny way while being dressed up like he threw a costume party no one else showed up for, and now he's taking his anger out on people. There's another interesting thing that comes up in discussions about this movie. After finishing it and being very surprised by the fact that I found it more goofy than scary, I went around and started reading other people's takes on the movie to better understand where I may have been getting blocks, like looking for things that I missed or whatever, trying to contextualize my experience a bit. And there was a theory that I saw raised a number of times that the person making this documentary is actually Ed Carver. Now, this is something that would definitely make the movie more interesting. It would lean into the idea that it's raised about the videos Carver took essentially being personal porn videos to keep around as memorabilia of his crimes, with this documentary sort of being the summary of it, where he would intentionally be going to people who were enamored by what they saw as the genius of his crimes to help stroke his ego even more. I like the idea, but I don't buy into it. And there are two scenes that sort of break the whole thing for me. First off, that scene of Cheryl being interviewed towards the end. She talks about how Carver is going to come back and take her away someday.
He didn't mean to leave me. And someday he's going to come back to me. And he's going to take me away.
Now, this isn't something that's irreconcilable with that theory, because it could be, maybe he held up a sign or, something that was telling her what she was supposed to say, and that's how he got the footage. I think it's a stretch. There's nothing that indicates that. But it's the other thing that kills the whole theory for me, and that's the scene I mentioned earlier where Carver returns to one of the murder sites to taunt the grieving mother. The same mother who's interviewed by the person making the documentary. She helped the police do a sketch of this guy. He's the dude who kidnapped her daughter and murdered multiple people, and she saw him face to face. She would absolutely recognize him, so this one interview kind of topples the entire theory for me. Could there theoretically be multiple people involved in the documentary and Carver only interviewed the ones who hadn't seen him? It's possible, I guess, but there's never even a single indication that he's working with anyone else at any point of the film, so it's not something I personally buy into. Could he have grown a beard? I guess. Would that have worked? Maybe, But there's still more issues with this. There are lots of theories regarding the real identity of Carver, but I honestly don't buy into any of the ones I've looked into either. I think Carver was definitely involved in law enforcement in some capacity because of how he can manipulate the functions of this sort of case and has some deep knowledge about the way law enforcement goes about profiling a killer, but there isn't anyone that was interviewed that I feel like I can point to and say, like, I think this is the killer. The most likely candidate, if I were to point one out, would be the dismemberment expert, who points out some very specific details regarding how Carver went about this aspect of his crimes, and he's getting really excited about it and looks to almost like force himself to calm down, like he needs to remind himself not to get too excited. But I don't think he's the killer. I think that if anyone wants to be a dismemberment expert, they've probably got one or two screws loose already. I think the thing that kind of kills a lot of the excitement of trying to find the identity of the killer is the casting. Ben Mesmer plays Ed Carver. Wouldst thou truly lordship sanction in one so bereft of light? He's not credited as playing any other character, so the voice of the killer and the little looks we get at his face don't align with anyone else. I think if anything, the dude may be a forensic specialist of some sort, because that would help to explain why he knows so much about the little details that go into these crimes, and it also makes sense because of the killer's tendency to return to where they committed a murder, and from what we see, Carver would absolutely love watching people right up close trying to solve the murders he commits. It makes sense. I think I would have honestly enjoyed the movie more if it was more plausible that Carver was actually the one making the documentary the whole time, because it could have enabled a lot of really fun puzzle solving, but there are too many holes for me to fully buy into any theory that has popped into my head for a second. In terms of the film's ending, Carver, after a very long time, decided it was time for him to move on to somewhere and someone fresh. And so he left these tapes behind for the police along with whatever is left of the psyche of Cheryl Dempsey, and they end with the film by leaning into the idea of he's still out there somewhere.
My feeling is that he's moved somewhere else. I doubt very strongly that he stopped killing. I doubt very strongly that anyone even knows he's there.
So, and please don't take this as me having a go at the filmmakers, because I truly am not, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way. This movie feels like a great idea for a mockumentary that was made a few years before it should have been. I think if this had had more time in the oven and they'd managed to ground it more and spend more time on making the case feel more believable, then this would have been something amazing. The Poughkeepsie Tapes, while I can respect it, of course, for being a relatively low-budget found footage horror film, which is something I have a massive soft spot for, wound up feeling like a juvenile attempt at making a gritty serial killer movie. Save for one or two moments, I did not find this to be a remotely scary or disturbing film, and this is usually the kind of thing that really gets to me. Mockumentaries absolutely can have a profound effect on me. I will reference Lake Mungo again because I can't stop talking about this movie. It's amazing. The format works wonders, but for me, only if I can absorb myself in the story enough to forget that what I'm watching is a piece of fiction, and that never happened with the Poughkeepsie Tapes. However, it's worth noting that if you've gotten to this point in the video and you haven't watched the movie, I do seem to be in the minority with how I felt about it, because I get tons of comments from people who found this to be a deeply disturbing and super effective watch. So don't disregard the movie based off me not liking it much. Please don't do that. I will always say watch things for yourself. Don't take my word as gospel on anything. I'm just sitting here and telling you what I thought. I've got no authority on any of this. It seems to be more likely that if you're into this kind of thing, as I am, you'll probably like this a lot more than I did. It just didn't click for me. I really need to talk about more found footage movies. Even if I didn't love this one, I love this stuff so much, and there are so many cool movies to touch on. You can't win them all, I guess. Thanks for watching through to the end. I hope you enjoyed the video enough that you want to see more, and if that's the case, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell because YouTube can sometimes suck at recommending channels. A huge thank you to my wonderful Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members who are a massive help in allowing me to continue committing as much time as I can to making these videos. If you want to gain access to things like behind the scenes material or gain early access to my videos, consider supporting me on either platform. As always, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.